Okay, guys, welcome back to another edition of Livewire. I'm your host, Jared Moore, and Livewire is the show where we take your questions from the chat. On tonight's program, we have Muscogee citizens Jordan Harmon and Mackenzie Roberts, and we're going to be speaking about the impacts of hyperscale data centers. To give you guys a little backstory on why we're having this live wire, if you watched last week's program where we had Julie Mainzinger come on and talk about Muskogee AI, she mentioned that there was going to be a town hall meeting at the College of the Muscogee Nation about this. And Julia sent me an email with the contact information for Miss Jordan Harmon here. And so we just set up a quick thing. I don't know how, we already have a bunch of questions in the chat about the topic. I don't know how many of these questions that the guests can answer, but we're gonna ask them after we do some basic setup. But first off, thanks so much for joining me tonight, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right. And so I guess to start off with, Jordan, if you could just tell us, for people in the audience who maybe don't even know what a data center is or anything like that, could you tell us, what is a data center and what do they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the reason we started hosting these town halls was because of a proposed legislation from National Council that seemed to happen pretty quickly. It didn't go through a regular committee process. It was brought to the General Council to rezone agriculture land over there by Loop Square Meat to an industrial zone for the purpose of building what they called a Muskogee Technology Hub, which was then revealed to be potentially a hyperscale AI data center. And just knowing the environmental impacts of that, we wanted to intervene and ask some questions of our national council, get some ideas of what this was going to mean for us. So what a data center is, if you're not already familiar, which it's okay if you're not, is basically they have been around as long as computers have been around. They've been around since the 1940s or 50s. And they're like computing infrastructure that houses all of the data that is stored digitally or in the cloud. And it's taken many different forms over the decades. And so in recent history, we have had data centers here, like, for example, where I live in Tulsa, our largest data center, which has been located at the Cherokee Industrial Park, was about entire campus was about 10 acres. Now, because of the demands of generative AI and the way that the data centers have to run 24/7, training AI models, deploying AI models, and then in addition to that, crypto mining and cryptocurrency is also contributing to this substantially and just running constantly. They're now looking at hyperscaling the data centers to meet the demands of AI. So it's no longer just about data storage. They're actually creating data by training AI models. And now the biggest data center that's being built in Tulsa is called Project Clydesdale. We don't necessarily know the company associated with it because they are signing NDAs, and it's about 500 acres. So we're jumping from our biggest being 10 acres to now 500 acres with almost a guarantee that they're going to apply to keep expanding. And they use like millions of gallons of water a day because they have to cool all of the computer systems that they house in their warehouses. And so that's kind of the biggest concern, is the scale of the data centers that are being developed and what the National Council was looking into actually investing in.
Okay. And I should mention to you guys, I forgot to mention this earlier, but Jordan is the policy analyst and legislative advocate for the Indigenous Environmental Network. There is a link to their website in the description of this video if you guys want to go check them out. There's also a link to the Facebook page about the meeting that's going to happen on October 2nd. If you guys want to get more information about how to attend and everything, both of those links are in the description of this video. Mackenzie, you're kind of like helping out with organizing these town halls. How did you get involved in this issue?
So yeah, I'm a vice chair of Yardika Indian community down here in the southern region of Mvskoke Nation. And through Yardika, we did a lot of land stewardship, food sovereignty, and cultural revitalization efforts. So as a result, that kind of necessitates a connection to the land. And so it's kind of pulled me into the work of, environmental activism. And so whenever you're kind of in that work, you see what data centers do and how many people are actively fighting against these data centers. So I got really involved just because we know the harms of data centers, and this is why we're putting these things together to get that out to the public, because we don't want that here. We don't want that in our rural areas, especially. And so I felt impassioned about it. I, as a citizen, contacted my representatives. I asked people to show up to the meeting on August 23rd. And so just to go and show our support and, let them know how we feel. And, as a result, that what from, a lot of other people, just letting them know, that they're in opposition of it. The legislation was postponed for 60 days. So they could fact find more. And then the day right after that, in one of our Muscogee Facebook groups, apologize, we got a message from Kim Linenbach. And she is a professor of information technology at Georgia Middle State University. And she is a resident of Twix County, which is very close to the Okmulgee mounds and the park. So she let us know that they're also fighting a data center down there proposed on the Okmulgee River corridor, which we know is very sacred and meaningful to us. It's in their backyard, so of course they have skin in the game. And the greater state of Georgia is being rapidly developed by data centers, and their lush, vibrant environment, their creatures, their wildlife, and their plants, they're all being decimated by this. So we want to protect our lands here in Oklahoma, and we sure want to protect our lands down there in Okmulgee Mound. So I knew Jordan was doing stuff like this, and so we just all came together. It was like meant to be.
Awesome. We've got a lot of questions piling up in the chat, but I did one more thing before we jump into these questions is, could you just give us an idea of some of the negative impacts from these data centers, like that in all these locations?
Yeah, sure. So the brief sort of lowdown on the impacts of data centers. The number one thing that I've heard people concerned about is the water usage. And yes, the hyperscale generative AI data centers are using massive amounts of water, up to 7, 8, 9, even 12 million gallons of water a day. And we were informed by a local representative here that Project Anthem did apply for 7 to 8 million gallons of water a day for a permit. Just to give you an idea of what that water usage looks like, it has a huge impact on local water resources as well as the habitat. And it is Tulsa water that they're going to be using. So for rural communities, if you have a proposal like that, make sure that you contact your county commissioners and your city councilors and figure out where they're getting all that water from, because it might be taken directly from underneath you. The other thing that people are very concerned about is the utilities rates. Because of the high demand, these are like top 10 energy users in the country right now, and it's rapidly expanding. It's going to be top 5, top 3 very soon. And it requires a build out of infrastructure. In fact, PSO is looking at expanding 3 new natural gas plants, more coal, opening 30 coal plants, and including wind, which wind is controversial here, and just to meet the demand. And because of that high demand, and they're getting the sort of sweetheart deals that commercial entities get from local governments, where they don't actually pay their fair share of utilities, even though they're using the most energy, the ratepayer, the individual residential ratepayer, picks up the tab on that. And PSO is already asking for rate hikes. Oklahoma Corporation Commission has already said they are willing to approve rate hikes to meet the energy demands of the data centers. There's other considerations as well, like environmental impacts, like the emissions that are associated with building such high energy users. Instead of sticking to promises to reduce emissions and promises of like net zero, which net zero is already problematic, but these corporations like Microsoft and Google, because of the profits that they're getting with the data center build out, have already abandoned those goals, and they've like increased their emissions by like 15%, 23% just since 2023. And those are kind of like the top three main impacts. Then, like Kenzie mentioned, the land that they're building on. Like, what are we giving up? What land are we giving up here? In Twiggs County, Georgia, it's a pristine black bear habitat. They've already built a 500-acre solar farm in that pristine habitat just to meet the demand of the data center they're planning. Not to mention the archaeological sites and the Muscogee Mound sites that exist there. Here in Oklahoma, we have a lot of agriculture land. The agriculture industry certainly needs some reforms and could use environmental reforms, but like at the end of the day, that's something we have to deal with because we need agriculture. We got to eat. We don't need AI. We don't need data centers. Like, it doesn't give us a benefit. And the jobs, they promise a lot of jobs that they don't actually deliver on. It's, you know, you're not getting hundreds or thousands of high paying tech jobs. You're getting more on the lower end of like security jobs. Not that those aren't good, but it's not what they're promising for what they're getting. And I'll end there.
All right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned all that stuff, because some of that stuff we have questions about. So I'm going to dive into the questions, guys. If you're watching this and there's a question that you have or a statement that you want to make that somehow doesn't get in, or you can't get in the chat because there's so much stuff going on, remember, this meeting is happening October 2nd at the College of the Muscogee Nation, and it's a town hall, so it's there for your input. Guys, show up, and the link to the information on that meeting is in the description of this in the description of this YouTube video. It's a Facebook link, so check that out too. And let's jump in here. TY Prol asks, is the PSO rate increase request to increase natural gas plant generation at their Oologah facility related to projects Anthem and Clydesdale? You kind of answered that already, but go ahead.
Well, I can't say for certain if that specific gas plant build out is for Project Anthem or Project Clydesdale specifically. Like, is that, I'm not sure exactly if that energy is going to be sent to the substation or how that direct line there. But OCC and PSO are very open about the fact that they are seeking to build out these plants to meet the demand for data centers. And it's not just Tulsa where they're building them. Other rural areas, Mays County, Stillwater, like the other rural communities are also experiencing that. So I do think you're going to see more of these proposals popping up. Okay. And they're already building that out to plan for it.
All right. TY Pro has another question here. The cost of these 2 new gas-fired units they want to add will reportedly result in increased residential costs, adding up to over $10 a month within 4 years. Is this typical or average increase?
So it's pretty typical to see an increase like that, and even more than that when the data centers pop up in your local areas. Residents are seeing rates like that across the board. In fact, there's a lot of data out there from the top 10 distribution regions that have the most data center build out right now, which includes like the state of Virginia, the Northeast, New Jersey, and stuff like that, have reported like up to $4 billion increase across the board in ratepayer utilities costs since 2023. And that's attributed to the data center build out.
Okay. Let's see here. I don't know if this is a question. I'm going to read it. TY Pearl says the power company requested permission to recover costs associated with purchasing additional capacity, which would result in $10 a month increase in consumer bills over the next 4 years. Oh, he's quoting another news story. TY Pearl asks, what is the likelihood of similar water utility bills increases for every data center built within those systems?
That's a good question, and it is very likely to see that increase because of the heavy demand on the water and the sweetheart deals that the developers are getting to take these resources like the energy and like the water. And ultimately it does fall on the residents because like they've already built a water line to the Cherokee Industrial Park to sort of meet that demand in that capacity. So that is a good question. Maybe I'll actually look up some specific numbers about the water side of the utilities, but that is something we're hearing from like the residents in Virginia where they do have a lot of data centers. Is like it is the water and the energy. It's all the utilities are raising for them.
Okay. TY Pearl asks, do data centers contribute to the heat island climate effects?
Oh, yes. Like the the data centers are just energy suckers and emissions emitters due to the build out of power plants that they have to have for them. And because they reach temperatures so high, like to the level of like a nuclear reactor, and that's why they require so much cooling systems. That's why they require all that water. And even in systems that they claim, you know, preserve water, they claim are sustainable, like the closed loop system is something that they're trying to build more in these data centers. It still requires millions of gallons of water, even if it's like 1 or 2 million less than, you know, without this system. They still lose water to evaporation, and the heat. I mean, they have to have huge HVAC systems just to keep the place cool, just to prevent a meltdown. So that's a really good point. And yes.
All right. TY Pearl asks, has there been any research done on GRDA rates related to the Google data center at the prior industrial park?
That is another really good question. And that I actually don't know because I have not looked into that specific industrial park the same way. But I'll definitely add that onto my radar. And if anyone in the comments knows information about it, go ahead and drop it.
Absolutely. Let's see here. TY Pearl asks, are there differences on the development impacts related to a data center being located within existing industrial parks as opposed to being located outside of one or in newly created ones?
Okay, what was the first part of that question?
Let me read it again. Hold on, I got it. Are there differences on the development impacts related to a data center being located within existing industrial parks as opposed to being located outside of one or in newly created ones?
Yeah, so there is probably like a slightly less of an impact when it's built in an already industrial park, already industrialized area because it's already zoned that way. Probably there's already infrastructure, probably if to the extent there's habitat destruction, like it's already taken place compared to like in Twiggs County where they're tearing down pristine habitat to build a data center. And in an industrial park, there's already some infrastructure that exists. So I would imagine that, yeah, the impact is probably slightly less, but just keep in mind, you know, people still have to live around these things. Like they still have to build out these coal and power plants, and they still have to take the municipal water to cool their systems.
Right. TY Pearl asks, is the Tulsa Mayor's Sustainability Task Force or are there any other organizations partnering together with your group or working separately to explore and address concerns about these data centers locally?
So the Sustainability Task Force, I believe, has been made aware of a lot of the residents' concerns about data centers, but I don't think that their function as a part of the mayor's office is really to help us fight them. I think that, not to speak on behalf of the mayor, but they do lean towards like development and economic development, and I haven't seen where they're really opposing the data centers. As far as other groups, because this has been such a rapid response in the last couple months, really, there's been sort of like independent people that have reached out and came to the town halls. And I think there's different groups that are becoming interested in that, especially with the energy development. Like this nuclear proposal is very concerning. I don't know if Kenzie, you had anything to add to that.
So I just would back you up and say that I agree that it would probably be slightly less of an impact. But we talked about utilities earlier, and it's not just it's not just hurting your pocket; it's also hurting your health, right? Because with like take for instance community like rural communities, a lot of people have well water. These it's going to get contaminated in Georgia, Virginia, a lot of these other rural communities that have been developed. They're pouring out brown water. You let it sit and sediment sinks to the bottom. You're not just seeing that, you're also seeing water pressure come out. In California, where there's also rampant data center development, people are being told to take less than 15-minute showers and going lower and lower to fulfill the need of water pressure that these data centers demand. So it's not just your pocket, it's your health. Alongside, even if it's a little bit less of an impact on the development or the land, it's still going to affect the people that live there too.
Absolutely. Let's see here. Where are we at? TY Pearl asks, is there an effort to organize concerned citizens to attend the upcoming state legislative interim study on data centers being held by Rep. Clinton?
So that's a great question. And Representative Clinton came to our town hall in Tulsa at the Central Library. And there is a recorded stream of it on the Honor the Earth Facebook page, if you wanted to check that out. And so she did have a lot of good comments to add about the processes for trying to stop the data center. So she started this interim study because she was also coming up against the NDAs and the sort of secrecy and like lack of transparency. And because she is a representative who cared about, what her citizens were going through, she decided to start that interim study. We did ask her about that, and she said she does want people to contact her with their questions. What do they want to know about the data centers? So go ahead and contact her about that. And she also really encouraged us to contact our own representatives in our districts, because there's a lot of different layers of government bodies that are involved in these types of projects. And so the legislature sort of sets the political environment. So for example, tax incentives. In this case, the legislature did instruct the Oklahoma Corporation Commission to conduct a nuclear feasibility study to meet the demand of data centers. And so that's ongoing right now, which we've never had a nuclear plant in Oklahoma. The last one that was proposed here was in 1973, and it was fought by the residents who did not want to deal with that. And so now we're having another one proposed just because of the AI data centers. So that's one thing that can help, is actually contacting your own district representative, as well as contacting Representative Clinton with your questions.
Okay. T.Y. Pearl asks, will you be advocating for worker community rights on these projects via public pressure to negotiate project labor agreements and community benefit agreements?
That is another really good question, because it's one thing that we're seeing these secret mystery companies have already screwed over the local laborers. I know that there was some kind of labor deal that was supposed to be worked out with Project Clydesdale, and they kind of threw that under the bus, and they weren't willing to work with, like the levels of percentages that they wanted to promise local union jobs. So those kind of negotiations are really meeting a stalemate. And it's just an example of these big promises that they're making to our communities. And Amazing Jobs is one of them. And Amazing Jobs is such an alluring promise for communities in need, and they're just not delivering it. And they're not working with local labor. They are antagonizing local unions. So yeah, good question.
Well, and while we're talking about that too, and I'm going to get back to the questions, they're still coming in, but we should mention, like how many guys does it take to run a data center roughly? Like what, because it's basically a bunch of computers. Like what does that look like? The number of jobs that it could possibly have, and would those jobs come from the local population? Or are they going to be people that maybe even are from not even from America? They could be from India or someplace, right? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, all those is totally right on. The fact that even though these take up such huge campuses, compared to other commercial buildings, they're like such few jobs in the square footage that it's in and the amount of resources that it takes. And it does take some people to run it. But like you said, there's no guarantee that those type of specialized jobs are coming from our local people. They're not necessarily training our local people to do their jobs. They are recruiting our local schools by promising training and internships and opportunities. And they're really just like putting this best face forward to them and like taking all their resources behind their back. And by the time, they're at an age to actually work in this data center, they're saying, no, actually, we don't have as many high paying jobs as we thought. I did see a report from one of the universities studying it. Like there's several reports from like University of Michigan, MIT, UCLA, looking at the data of these things. And the majority of the jobs are security jobs. And they pay an average of $50,000 to $60,000 a year. A perfectly respectable career, but not what they're promising us. And just think about how much money, how many resources they are taking. It's really not good enough for a couple hundred, security jobs.
Yeah, and if you wanted to compare it to something else, that's going to do maybe the same amount of environmental damage or take up the same amount of resources, if you have like a car factory or something that's employing people, is nowhere near the numbers of people going to be employed at a data center. They're going to need security guards to watch the outside of the building for a certain amount, is like maybe 20 people or something like that. So, and I think if you guys, and I'm talking to the audience, if you guys go look up any data centers, you can kind of see what we're talking about. Most of the real estate inside those buildings is going to be for computer servers and mainframes, and cooling equipment, like you mentioned. So there's not going to be a bunch of people in there.
Can I add on to that really quick?
Sure, go for it, Mackenzie.
Yeah. So, like Jordan said, there isn't going to be the type of jobs that they are promising. But in some studies, the boom is in construction, and then whenever those AI centers, finally come up, those workforces are decreased by about 2/3. So it's a vast labor reduction. And not only that, it's whenever the utilities are hiking, and they're not giving the jobs, how much consumer power does that give to these local economies? How much does it give to the local consumer there? How much buying power does the local consumer have? And then talking about economic development and longevity of these centers, Meta and Amazon are already looking at deferring away from them, even though they're some of the most large proponents of these centers, because the obsolescence of them are seeing around about a decade. So about a decade of massive destruction to the land and the people. You don't get very many jobs. If the allure is economic development, it does not deliver on that promise.
Yeah, good point. We're getting close to about 30 minutes, which we're at 29 minutes, which is normally where we wrap for the program. I'm going to try to steamroll through the rest of the questions in the chat here. T.Y. Pearl asks, should Tulsans reach out to the mayor's sustainability task force to request they hold a public listening session, Q&A town hall on data centers?
I would say yes, definitely do that. And even more importantly, contact your county commissioners, because they are making rezoning decisions. And in fact, the county commission just passed a tax incentive for Project Clydesdale this week. So keep contacting them. They have hosted some hearings, but if you've ever been to a hearing like that, it's very biased. Keep contacting city council as well, because some of these decisions have to be approved by them. But yeah, the sustainability office can still definitely be worth reaching out to, but don't leave out the commissioners too.
All right. T.Y. Pearl says, City of Tulsa has community conversation, public meetings scheduled. Are you organizing concerned advocates to attend these meetings? And then he lists, the first one is tomorrow night with the information there. Are you guys planning on attending any of those meetings?
That is a really good suggestion. I have seen those meetings. For me personally, it's hard to get to like all the meetings, and a lot of our coalition are spread across the state. They're not only in Tulsa, they're actually kind of all over the place. But that is a good suggestion, and I really do encourage people to engage with that as much as you can. And we'll probably be working on, in fact, we're having a coalition call this evening after this. So we will be working on how to expand some of that organizing work so people can feel like, yeah, they can get more looped in. So thank you for that suggestion.
Okay. T.Y. Prohl asks, does the way these projects get built through bond funding result in ratepayers mostly paying interest to lenders on the project's actual costs?
Okay, so the bond issue is something that I've actually heard brought up before, and it's not something I am super familiar with. So that's actually the second time I've heard that question asked. And I personally need to look more into that before I can really know how to track that.
Okay. No harm, no foul. Let's see here. T.Y. Pearl asks, how are these projects financed? How much are they being funded from foreign sources?
That is such a good question and leads me back to one of our number one problems with the data centers, and that is the NDAs. Because the answer to that is that nobody knows, because they won't even reveal who they are. If it's Meta, if it's Amazon, if it's XAI, if it's Microsoft, if it's Google, we won't know until the thing's basically built already. And they have our elected leaders signing NDAs, like our national council signed an NDA. So when I called them and said, hey, who is this? What is this? And they said, well, we can't say anything because of an NDA. That's a big problem.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys caught that, but that is a huge problem for elected representatives to be signing NDAs or contracts similar to NDAs without the approval of their constituents. That shouldn't be happening. The National Council works for the citizens, and they need to disclose to the citizens all of the stuff that if a citizen is asking them, they need to disclose that. I don't know if you can sign, there's some legal questions there with that. So, but the fact that representatives are signing NDAs is not a good sign, because they're normally when you have some type of an NDA agreement, the reason that one of the parties is signing the NDA agreement is because they're getting something out of the situation. You don't normally sign an NDA when somebody's asking you for something, right? Because if you're not getting anything, you don't have to agree to it, right? So that's the part that I find especially disturbing, is that elected officials are signing those. Let me go. Yeah, and T.Y. Pearl, that's a good point. NDA stands for non-disclosure agreement. It's basically a contract you sign with another person or entity that says anything that we talk about during this deal, I'm legally bound from telling anybody about it, right? Let's see here. Let me see if we're on the questions here. T.Y. Pearl asks, are you familiar with the work of Carrie Dickerson and Sunbelt Alliance work to stop the Black Fox nuclear plant by Catoosa? Are the elders who fought that being consulted and included on this?
So yes, I am familiar with Carrie Dickerson and the Carrie Dickerson Foundation, and that's also something that was brought up at our last town hall. I think it was actually a Cherokee woman in Tulsa who had asked about the Carrie Dickerson Foundation. So it's definitely people that we want to reach out to, especially with this nuclear study. And yeah, like I said, this is things that we've rapidly responded to recently, but we definitely want to loop in those people that were involved at that time, because they know what we're up against. They fought it for 10 years before they succeeded. So
Yeah. And I also should mention too, TY Pearl or anybody else that's watching this or in the chat, that there's a link to the Indigenous Environmental Network's webpage in the description of this video. So if you want to go there, I'm sure they have a submission block or some way to get emails so you guys can get directly involved with them or loop them in with any resources that you may have that we're not talking about right now with Jordan. Let me see where we are with the questions here. TY Pearl asks, how much corporate welfare and taxpayer subsidies are they getting? Where does it typically come from? Do they get tax increment financing?
Yes, they do. In fact, a TIF was just approved this week by the Tulsa commissioners. So yes, that's a great question. They are getting tax incentives to come here. They are getting TIFs. They are getting ad valorem. They're subsidizing their presence here. So yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add, Kenzie?
Oh no, a pot fell. And you guys heard it.
You're fine. So just we're at 36 minutes and the chat questions are exhausted. I did want to throw in some questions from me because I just had some questions. Is there from our perspective as Native peoples and citizens of Muscogee Creek Nation, is there a data center that is okay? Is there a way to do this that respects resources and everything? Is it who's running the data center that's the problem, or and then my other question would be, if you had the National Council right now and you were going to have them pass some legislation that relates to data centers, what would it look like? What would it be about?
That's kind of the question, is there a good data center? So I would just go back to the history of computing and data centers, and we've had fairly low impact data centers this entire time because we have not had corporations with this AI technology driving this 24/7 constant exponential growth. So a data center that is actually necessary to store data would look like something that is scaled way down to actually meet the need and not to meet a projected profit or a projected opportunity for a corporation, but actually meets what our realistic needs are for government essential data storage. It would probably look from my perspective as an Indigenous femme person with Indigenous values and Muskogee values, we wouldn't be putting profit over our resources or putting profit over people or being secretive and not communicating with the public and with the citizens that it's going to impact. And we would be thinking about not taking more than what we need. That is a Indigenous value that we're raised with. We only take what we need. We leave things for other people and other living things. We don't need millions and billions of gallons of water for generative AI. We might need a smaller scale, less impactful, true data storage center for essential government functions. We don't necessarily need a huge hyperscale data center to employ some kind of new AI model so that the casino can keep making exponential profits. There's a difference between those things. So no, there's not a sustainable hyperscale AI data center. That does not exist. We do not need a hyperscale AI data center to store our essential data as Muskogee people, or to have data sovereignty, which data sovereignty is about actually managing our own data, taking it out of the hands of the federal government, out of the hands of white academia, and actually controlling it ourselves, not generating AI models. It's just not what we need.
To add on to that part, the first part of your question, so there's a reason why a lot of different tribes refer to water as our oldest relative, and it's because the water cycle has been so reliable all throughout millennia, since time immemorial, that it has worked and it has replenished itself. So with a data center evaporating water at such a breakneck speed and voracious speed, where it evaporates off to where it cannot physically replenish itself, and it completely disrupts the water cycle in that regard, that is, to me, that's antithetical to us as Indigenous people, stewards of the land. Because, if it's our relative, if your grandma's giving you something, if your grandma's feeding you, you're not going to take all of it. You're not going to eat her ass at house and home. You're going to be a good relative because she takes care of you. The other part of it is, that toxins, so whenever they postponed the legislation, there were talks about maybe finding a different parcel of land to put it on with different infrastructure, because the land that is up for rezoning is Loop Square Ranch, which is our primary food sovereignty initiative. But to me, as an Indigenous person who likes to forage wild onions, right? Indigenous people are not going to look for their ancestral foodways in convenient places. And so even if the infrastructure is better and away from communities, it is still going to affect community members because it will affect the local fauna, the local flora. But also we, are going to go and we're going to forage there for Indigenous medicine ways and foodways. And other tribes that inhabit here, they will also do that as well. So that poison is going to, poison us. It just disrupts our ways of life. So that's how I feel about that.
All right. Well, great answers, guys. The chat is saying is a great answer. Scale is the answer. Just to touch back to the other part of my question, do you guys have any suggestions? Like if there was going to be, if legislation had to be passed on this topic, what would that legislation look like, in your opinion?
The first thing I would ask for is a moratorium on data centers. This is what other communities, cities, and counties are asking from their leaders. And in fact, some have initiated that. It's a moratorium to give our communities a chance to get our bearings, like do our research, like Rep. Clinton has that interim study going. Like we don't need reckless development. We don't need a law shuffled through the National Council in less than a week without us even knowing what's going on with it. So I would ask for a moratorium that could be potentially lifted. And I would ask for legislation, kind of like what Rep. Clinton is doing, like an interim study that brings in not just tech experts, but like people from our communities with spiritual needs and Indigenous values to help guide them in this process to address what is our data needs, what is our cybersecurity needs, what kind of data center do we need, and can our resources support?
Absolutely. Yeah, Mackenzie, do you have anything to add?
Just probably, with the NDAs. I mean, me personally, like if you're a representative representing the people and this is something that you're going to bring before the people and you can't talk to the people about it, to me, that just not only does it just not sound right or, like not good to the people, but it also doesn't really beget trust or mutual trust between, our government and the constituents. So to feel represented, like we had maybe 3,000 people turn out in our last election. And from, from my perspective, I've heard a lot of people say it's voter apathy because they don't feel represented, so whenever we sign NDAs and this is something that is really impactful on the community and it's something a lot of people are really passionate about and concerned about, and you have that non-representation feeling, they just, it feeds that. So I think something like that, just more transparency with decision making, especially whenever it comes to that, and maybe just, pumping the brakes if they do bring you a development project that has NDAs.
All right. We're at 44 minutes. We've gone over a little bit, but I'm loving the discussion. I just wanted to pop in two more things that T.Y. Pearl's put into the chat here. He says, how does this jive with the climate action plan? And he says data centers aren't really addressed in that document. So, and if you guys are you guys familiar with the Creek Nation climate action plan?
A little bit.
It's a PDF. You can find it online and Google it, and it's how the nation's plan for sustainability and stuff in the future. And it has a lot of guidelines. But like T.Y. Pearl says, it doesn't really talk about data centers or those impacts. So I did want to thank you guys for joining me tonight, Jordan, Mackenzie, and you guys send me an email for anything you guys got going on in the future, because we'd love to continue to follow this issue at the tribe. And thanks to you guys for tuning in tonight and sticking with us all the way through. I have a live wire scheduled for next week that is going to be about a world premiere of a music project with Chickasaw composer Jared Tate and Muscogee soprano Dr. Kirsten Kunkel. And that's going to be at 1 p.m. on the 8th. And then the week after that, on the 22nd, we're going to do another live wire about a music festival that's happening, that's going to be put on by a Muscogee citizen in Texas. So keep your eyes open for that. And with that being said, Mado, ladies, for joining me tonight, and we'll see you guys again. Mado, hadam, chihichat, please.